Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us here at home today. I guess discretion, the better part of valor, or out of an abundance of caution, being home and kind of just sort of, being careful on the roads. We got obviously a lot of folks that work here at Dawg Nation. We want to be wise in terms of when we put people on the roads, things like that. And perhaps where you are, you've got a lot of snow. I've got at least enough snow to cover the ground out here where I am. Perhaps depending on where you live, you have a whole lot more. So we're going to settle in and talk some Georgia football here today. There's already some fun chatter out there about the 2025 season. I love how fast in college football we turn the page, and that's already happening here this week. And that to me is an awful lot of fun. We'll do that with you here today. We've also got two great guests. Davin Bellamy stops by before we're done. Mike Griffith also on the program here today. But off the top, if I'm being honest, I saw something yesterday that kind of aggravated me a little bit. And if you're a Georgia fan, I bet this probably aggravates you a little bit too. So we're going to talk about what it means and kind of how it perhaps provides some fuel for Georgia going forward. So what do you say we begin that way here today? We're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Fun to be able to be settled in here at home and relaxed here today and kind of enjoying all that. Perhaps where you are, you're also kind of nestled into your home there as well. A lot of folks around the South have gotten a lot of snow. And if you're south of me, no doubt you've gotten plenty of it. We're seeing record snowfall in parts of South Georgia and into Florida and across the Gulf there. So listen, if that's where your story here today, we are hopefully you're safe and warm and and perhaps inside here for a little bit, or maybe outside playing in it. That's what you choose to do. Either way, we are very happy to have you here as part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. Not our normal studio show, but hopefully something that feels very close to what we typically do. It'll be Davin Bellamy later on, Mike Griffith coming up in a few moments. I also like the fact that we're already very much hearing some early preseason chatter about the 2025 season. I think it's really fun that college football does a great job of turning the page so quickly on the upcoming year. So we'll do some of that here today. In particular, some early projections about how many wins Georgia might get in the 2025 season and some of the teams it's competing with, how many wins they might get as well. That is always a good thing to be able to do. But prior to that, let me begin this way. Before we kind of get too busy looking ahead at 2025, let us look back at 2024 just for a moment. I saw something yesterday, noticed it right away, based on the chatter I've received on social media and kind of in our comment sections on video already this morning. It seems like many of you noticed it too, that when the final Associated Press Top 25 and the final coaches poll came out yesterday, the sort of ribbon, if you will, on the 2024 season, could not help but notice that Texas, a team that Georgia beat twice, somehow ranked ahead of Georgia in these final polls. One of those polls had Texas third. One of them had Texas fourth. Georgia came in sixth in both the AP and the coaches poll. And in the grand scheme of things, this probably doesn't mean very much. I certainly don't believe that Texas is going to hang a banner for finishing third or fourth. At least I hope they wouldn't. And had Georgia finished that high, it wouldn't really change either the recollection you have about the good moments or the not so good moments in the 2024 season. That these polls in some respects are, somewhat ceremonial. But let's face it, they're still fun to talk about. We like to kind of do this throughout the season from week to week, and certainly when something like this comes out on the kind of the final week of the year, we sort of like to talk about that too. And when you see Texas ranked ahead of Georgia, there's an element of this that sort of feels like, I don't know. It feels a little bit personal, does it not? To use a word that you sometimes hear, it almost feels like erasure of Georgia's season because let's face it, when you look at the things that happened across college football this year, when you look at the significant accomplishments, I don't think there's any doubt that Georgia winning this SEC deeper than it's ever been before, playing the schedule that Georgia had to play, arguably as tough as anything anyone's ever done. I don't think there's any doubt that even though Georgia, based on where it was ranked to begin the season, and how it kind of finished. Obviously, that's a disappointment. That, Georgia wanted to be better, obviously, than sixth to finish the year. But even if we acknowledge that that's true, there is still some legitimate accomplishment to be described when it comes to Georgia's season. And frankly, Georgia had a better season than Texas did. And the reason why this perhaps matters to some people is because, one of the things you see if you spend time around sports media, whether it be like the Shout Fest ESPN shows or talk radio or podcasts, whatever else, like the one thing you see a lot of the sort of like trollish SEC haters doing, there's an element to which they'll say, boy, the SEC is down bad. Georgia, Alabama, nowhere to be found here competing for the national championship. In fact, the only team that's left is Texas. That all of a sudden Texas, this newcomer to the SEC, they're sort of carrying the flag for the whole conference. Have you heard that said? My guess is you probably have. And my response back to that has always been, Texas ain't carrying anything for Georgia. The only thing that Texas is toting for Georgia is the 2 L's that Georgia gave them during the season. And that's it. And so the way in which the discussion seems to be happening around Georgia, the SEC, and Texas right now almost requires completely ignoring what Georgia was able to accomplish this year in order to sort of cast the narrative that the SEC is so down bad that the only standard bearer the league currently has is a team in Texas that a lot of SEC fans didn't want in the conference in the first place. But obviously you have to kind of tie yourself in knots with a fairly endless streak of illogical arguments to even get to that point. So since the national media doesn't seem capable of doing this, the coaches that vote in the coaches poll, the writers that vote in the AP poll, since they seem incapable of doing this, what do you say for a second we do what they either were unable or unwilling to do, which is actually give Georgia credit and the credit it deserves for these 2 wins against Texas here this year? And in fact, let's go back to October. Boy, a lot has happened since then. And you could be forgiven if you don't remember the events in Austin there that night because of all the twists and turns, not just the Georgia season has taken, but the entirety of the college football season. You could be forgiven if you don't remember all of that, but we're going to help you. We're going to jog your memory. Georgia goes on the road, dominates the game from pillar to post, led wire to wire, an incredible response to the loss that Georgia had taken in Tuscaloosa a little earlier. There were already no shortage of doubters that the season was about to implode. It was about to fall apart. Georgia was going to go into Texas, largest crowd they've ever had at DKR Stadium. They had the drone show. They had the celebrities. They had all of that. And Georgia did not flinch. And frankly, Georgia dominated the game, even though the Texas students were throwing bottles in the field. The officials were tolerating anarchy. Even though all of the sort of extraneous issues that existed on the periphery of that game, Georgia never flinched, led wire to wire, and introduced Texas to the SEC by going into its stadium and, at least figuratively speaking, planting its own flag right there on the turf in Austin. AP poll voters don't seem to remember that. Coaches poll voters don't seem to remember that. But we don't forget. In fact, let's hear Kirby Smart with the emphatic, it's not even a statement. It's almost like a pro wrestling style, cutting a promo on ESPN and everybody else after the Dogs beat Texas there that night. Let's let you listen to this as we recollect on what these poll voters don't seem capable of remembering. This was Kirby Smart in October.
Nobody believed us, and then they tried to rob us with calls in this place, and these guys are so resilient. You know what I mean? We talked about intent. What was our intent when we walked on the field? Our intent was not to take pictures, not to do all the superstar stuff. Our intent was to eat. Our intent was to come eat and be hungry. I'm not interested in all the bells and whistles. What I want is a team that fights their ass off, and they did tonight.
So I think that's incredible from Kirby Smart, and it's the kind of thing that, we said this at the time, and we've said it ever since then. It sort of seems like there was some real extra energy from Kirby Smart in that post-game remark. Now, there's always going to be a sense in which Kirby's a little bit more candid, a little bit more fired up in the post-game than he would be in a normal press conference where he has a chance to sort of steady himself and be buttoned up and be measured and filter what he does and doesn't want to say. Like a lot of us in the heat of the moment, the Smart filter probably doesn't work quite as well. And so in that particular moment, like right after the game, that was on TV with the ABC crew that night, the filter not quite working, and Kirby just sort of let it rip. But sometimes when the filter's not quite working, that's when you end up saying the truest stuff of all. And Kirby pretty clearly thought the officials were coming out to get him, and pretty clearly thought that the ESPN folks were too easily disregarding Georgia. And in that moment, in a way that he probably would not if he had more time to kind of, measure his thoughts before speaking, in that particular moment, he let it rip. And honestly, given the fact that now, all these months later, Georgia still doesn't seem to be getting credit for this win, all these months later, the energy with which Smart spoke back then, doesn't it seem even more poignant? And the same thing's kind of true when it comes to the SEC championship win that Georgia got against Texas, where once again, from the podium after that's over with, Smart's, once again, sort of cutting a pro wrestling style promo in the direction of Greg Sankey. Now, most of this, I believe, was, kind of a joke, but nonetheless, Sankey sent us on the road all year long. In the unfiltered moment there, I believe the actual truth came out, which is that I think there are a lot of people around Georgia, rightly so, that sort of look at the way that Texas was treated in its first year in the SEC and the way that Georgia was treated as the kind of top program in the SEC, and they do see an imbalance there. And they do see an inequity there. And I do think that probably justifiably so has served as a source of irritation for people within the Georgia program, the same way it does for us on kind of the outside as sort of media fans. That question of what exactly is going on. But ultimately, that SEC championship win for Georgia was about more than just being spiteful of Texas in its first year in the league, or what some people believe was, Greg Sankey's wish to have a nice on-ramp for Texas into the league. It was also really special for Georgia too. And when Kirby Smart talked about that, I also thought he was really good as well. And once again, AP poll voters don't seem capable of remembering early December. Coaches poll voters, for the most part, don't seem capable of remembering back to early December. But around here, we don't forget. We still remember. And I want to share with you a really great statement that Kirby Smart made on television with the SEC network folks about why that SEC championship was so important to Georgia. So as you're a Georgia fan and you listen to all of this, you have every right to kind of point at all of the things that you want to see Georgia be better at 2025. We have said that and we'll continue to say that. You have every right to feel that way. You have every right to kind of call for some improvement in a lot of areas for Georgia. But can we do two things at once? Can we think about that and talk about that? And believe me, we will. Can we think about that and talk about that while also having the proper reflection on fond memories that those outside the boundaries of this program don't seem willing to recollect? Can we do that? Let's hear Kirby Smart about why this year's SEC championship was so meaningful to him personally. This is powerful. Take a listen to this.
My thoughts are the 31 years I've been since 1993. I've been watching this game. I was a high school junior and saw him play in Birmingham, Alabama, Florida, and I just have so much respect. I mean, it matters in this neck of the woods. And our kids wanted this game because of last year. They didn't win this game last year. Mm-hmm. We were going to have a group leave that possibly didn't have an SEC championship, and now some of them have two. And I don't think we have a group that's ever had two. We've had a group with two natties. We've never had a group with two SECs.
Yeah, wow.
And so those seniors took pride in the fact that, you know what, I got two SECs. They're hard to come by.
I really love that. I really do. And I do think that matters. And if AP poll voters and coaches poll voters and, TV talking heads and podcast hosts, other than obviously this one, and sports writers and the rest of the whole world, if they can't give Georgia the proper credit for that, we are going to make sure that we do that. In the midst of talking about all the ways in which Georgia needs improvement, all the ways in which Georgia can be better, we're going to give also proper appreciation for what Georgia did this season. Because as we said yesterday, when you look at where Georgia begins 2025, from the perspective of a lot of these like way too early top 25s that are coming out, when you see the teams that are sort of thought to be ahead of Georgia, to me, if you're a UGA fan, it ought to fill you with a greater sense of confidence about the fact that the improvement we would say Georgia needs, they are capable of providing. Because one of the teams that, once again, everybody seems to believe will be better than Georgia next season is a team in Texas that, based on the results here this year, you have zero reason to fear them. A Penn State or a Notre Dame or even an Ohio State, given what it needs to replace, there's no guarantee that they won't replace it well. They may win the national championship again, next year. But when you look at what's thought to be ahead of Georgia coming into the upcoming season in 2025, and when you look at what Georgia was still able to do in the midst of a season that probably wasn't everything the Dogs were hoping it would be, I think the right viewpoint on Georgia moving forward is to see this program through the lens of optimism and believe that there are even better days ahead for Georgia than the great celebration we saw take place in Atlanta when Georgia beat Texas for a second time and won the SEC championship. And then one more thing before we wrap up this topic, to give you an idea of how maybe the rankings should have looked, you perhaps read at DawgNation.com yesterday. We had a really good story with Connor Riley, who, in the final Coaches Bowl, and not every coach votes in the Coaches Bowl every year. You get sort of tabbed to be that. And, I'm sure it's not the coach's favorite thing to do. And we also know that for the most part, it's, support staff that probably actually fills out the ballot for them, but it's the coach's name that goes on it. And during the year, those rankings are, they're confidential. We don't know who did what. AP poll voters are always kind of on the record. Coaches poll have anonymity until the very end. The final ballot is made public. So we know Kirby Smart, a coaches poll voter this year, we know what his final ballot looks like. And I would say it looks a whole lot more like what maybe the rest of the ballot should have looked like. So on the screen, I'll show this to you here for a moment. This published at DawgNation.com yesterday. Kirby Smart had Indiana 10th, Boise State 9th, Ole Miss 8th, Tennessee 7th. Then you get to the top 6, where Smart had Penn State 6, Texas 5, and Georgia ahead of both of them at number 4. That, to me, is what everybody should have done. Should have had Georgia ahead of Texas. Now, Kirby did have Oregon ahead of Georgia. They only lost once all year long. No dispute there. Notre Dame beat Georgia. Once again, no dispute to have them second. They were also the national runner-up. And then Ohio State obviously won the national championship. So we would say the Kirby Smart ballot is what they all should have looked like. Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oregon, then Georgia ahead of Texas and Penn State. So perhaps the national media not giving Georgia the credit it deserves, and frankly, some of these other coaches not doing the same thing. We think that Kirby Smart got his coaches poll ballot right. And if you're a Georgia fan who's a little bit aggravated by that here today, we think you're well within your rights to feel that way. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy that you're with us here today. We're at home. We're not in our normal studio situation, but I really appreciate our good friend Cody Chaffins, who's producing here today and making this show hum right along, even though we can't quite be in the studio. I will tell you that one of the amazing sort of steps forward we've made as a show the last couple of years used to be that when we were on the road, whether that be like in New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl or in the rare moment we had to be home for whatever reason, the show sounded a lot different when we were outside the studio than it did when we were in. Now, I still prefer to do the show in studio, but I would say that we've made big strides in terms of the show kind of functioning pretty much the same way when we're not in studio as it does when we're on location. So I think it's really good stuff. So I really appreciate all that today. And by the way, huge thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible. We are so thankful for great sponsors like that, folks who've been loyal to us, and our encouragement to you is to be loyal to them, because not only does Breda Pest Management support DawgNation Daily, they also support the Georgia Bulldogs too. They're the official pest control provider of UGA athletics. And, to be frank here, I think we're going to have to start recognizing, who the supporters are, who's trying to band together, because look, when you look at the way in which the discussion has been the last few weeks, last few months, there are clearly some battle lines being drawn where some of these like really big Big Ten programs all of a sudden feel like they've got a financial advantage over, those of us here in the SEC. Well, one of the ways we might be able to fight back against that is by recognizing, who's really out there working hard to support the, support the Dogs and be a part of that program. Well, our friends at Breda Pest Management have been doing that for a long time, the official pest control provider of UGA athletics. So when you work with them, you're getting a chance to sort of support Georgia through your support of Breda Pest Management. And also because they've had a long-standing track record of success, been in business since 1975, 125 employees stretched all across our market area. I see those Breda trucks all the time. Because of that success, they're going to be able to leverage that for your benefit, meaning they're going to put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. You choose to work with Breda for your termite protection, for instance, or something like that, they're going to put more money back in your pocket for doing that because they're going to charge you less than the other company you're working with. You may see this every year where the cost of service is going up, but perhaps the quality of service is going down. With our friends at Breda Pest Management, that's not going to be the case. That's not going to be the case. But you can find them online, bredapest.com. That's BREDA, bredapest.com for more on that. Breda Pest Management, the official pest control provider of the Georgia Bulldogs, longtime friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily. Make sure you check them out today. Okay, two great guests for us coming up here in just a bit. It's Davin Bellamy. We got a lot of stuff to talk to with Davin. We'll kind of look back on how it was that Ohio State was able to get it done against Notre Dame, what we learned about college football because of – actually, we may not have Davin Bellamy here today. Okay, so sounds like Davin had some unavoidable plans, so we may not be able to do that with Davin here today. But we will have Mike Griffith coming up in just a couple of minutes, so a fun conversation coming up with him. So we'll catch up with Davin a little bit later on. Sounds like something's kind of popping in here with him on that. So hopefully everything is good with Davin, but we'll see if we can catch up with him again very soon. Mike Griffith coming up in just a few minutes. That will be a really good discussion. And as a lead in to one of the things I want to talk to Mike about, it's actually something that he's written at DawgNation.com. We'll use Around the Doghouse here, presented today by Georgia Farm Bureau, as a way of discussing that. My favorite thing about college football, and we are in a time in which people are kind of noticing the ways in which it sort of seems like college football is changing, and some of those changes sometimes sort of feel like they might be changes for the worst, and in some cases what seems to be a lot of change, college football still finds a way to sort of endure through some of that. That is a very prevalent ongoing conversation. We all have done our own version of what does college football look like going forward, and can it still resemble the sport that we've all loved for our entire life? Well, when we make a list of the things that we love about college football, one of the things that I love, and maybe I'm just so entrenched in this sport that I noticed this about college football and don't recognize this with the other sports, but I have a sneaking suspicion this is at least somewhat unique to college football, which is the way in which immediately after one season ends, we are already on to the next. And there is no shortage of speculation and just all kinds of talk out there about what the next season is going to look like. We did some of that yesterday with national championship odds and way too early top 25s and things like that. You've also got the sports books out there starting to put some early win totals together. These are what you sometimes hear called over-unders. You can bet if you want to. Will so-and-so team win more games than this or fewer games than this in the regular season? But even if you don't plan on betting on this type of thing, it's still an interesting projection to give you a little bit of a snapshot about what next year might look like. So before we bring on Mike Griffith to talk about some of this kind of stuff, let me show you a little bit of this on the screen here for a moment. This is coming from one of the offshore outlets called Sports Betting AG. So they've already got their totals out for next year. No surprise that Ohio State, this year's national champion, coming in at with a win total of 11. That's regular season only, of course. But how about the fact in the group coming in at 10.5, you've got Penn State, Oregon, Texas, and you've also got Georgia. Now, this is very early, and frankly, some of the kind of, sort of, I guess, local American sports books will have their chance to sort of have their say on this eventually. And we may see some of these numbers change just slightly, but to kind of keep a theme going that we've had going here for a little while, take some comfort in that Georgia's got a lot of change here coming up this upcoming year. Carson Beck's no longer here. You're now 2 years removed from back-to-back national champions, as opposed to in 2023 when you were kind of the year after that. There's a little bit of distance now between Georgia and that great period from just a couple of years ago. You're asking questions about, who your key offensive playmakers are going to be, how you replace guys like Jalen Walker, Malachi Starks, and all those names on defense. It seems like there's a period of transition taking place for Georgia, and in one respect, that's undeniable. And yet, even in the midst of that, on the basis of at least one sports book here, the belief is that Georgia playing a schedule that, as we said the other day, you can make the case it might be even tougher next season than it is this year if the projected improvement takes place for Florida and the projected improvement takes place for Auburn. If some of the stuff that we're hearing talked about, if that actually takes place, there is a way in which Georgia's schedule is even tougher next season than it was this season. But at least one sports book putting its money where its mouth is says we don't expect a lot of regression yet from Georgia. We still expect Georgia to be right in the center of the conversation all season long. I think you take some comfort in that. Let me show you one more thing about this, and then we'll get ready to talk to Mike Griffith here today. I think there's an interesting, I guess, contrast that shows up with some of the early win totals that are out there and some of the projections that are starting to take shape about how certain things might be different in 2025. I don't know if we can put the graphic back up there for a moment, but as an
Let's take a
example
look
of
around the
this,
rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
As an example of this, you've got Ole Miss right now listed at 9, at 9 wins in total. Whereas a lot of these way too early top 25s right now don't necessarily have Ole Miss as a preseason top 25 team. That they lose a lot of their transfer a lot of the transfer success they had here in 2024, those guys now ready to move on. It's not obvious right now how well that Ole Miss will be able to replace all of that. Conversely, on the other side, you've got Florida with a win total of just 6.5. But a lot of these way too early top 25s are projecting much better success for Florida here this season. So if you move past Georgia here for a little bit, you see a little bit of a contrast right now between SEC teams that were good a year ago that some are suggesting may not quite be as good in 2025, and some teams who've been struggling for a while who might finally figure it out next season. So if you're interested in being a betting man on some of this kind of stuff, you might see some early value in how some of these numbers are being kind of kicked around to the extent that you can actually even get a bet down on it. But for now, the thing that matters is Georgia found a way to win the SEC a year ago, found a way to get 10 regular season wins, and at least one of the sports books that's early in the game in terms of weighing in for 2025, they expect Georgia to be right back there again next season too, and perhaps some comfort to be taken from that. That is Around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And of course, as you're driving around right now, perhaps you're looking to be careful on the roads here, maybe staying at home because there is ice out there. Let's face it, that if you turn on the news and things like that, you're going to see these little fender benders, these little crashes. You're going to see people that don't quite handle the ice and snow very well, and that's going to create a little bit of a mess for them when it comes to their vehicle. And if something like that happens, you better believe you're going to hope you have good auto insurance coverage when that takes place. Now, the smart thing to do right now is to not be out on the roads and take it easy and be careful and stay safe. But at any moment, if you have some sort of issue with the vehicle you drive because of an auto accident or something like that, you better find out pretty quick, and you will be finding out pretty quick, hey, who am I working with? And are these people going to be friendly to me? Are they going to be attentive to my needs? Well, our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau, that's what they're all about. They're always the home team. They're claims adjusters, they're agents, they're folks kind of working and living right here in the great state of Georgia, just like you do. That means that they're out to serve you the same way they've served our agricultural community for a long time. They've been a friend of Georgia's farmers. They now want to be a friend to you. So you got to have auto insurance. Why not trust good Georgia folks to help you with all of that? Same thing for your home insurance or any of your other insurance needs. Our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau can take care of you with all of that. So I want you to give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. It's, of course, great to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. So as we said, we'll catch up with Davin Bellamy a little bit later on. Sounds like he's got some issues to take care of today. Hopefully everything's okay with him. But the guy that wrote the story that we were just talking about right there was our good friend, Mike Griffith. So what do you say we find out more about the outlook for Georgia for the upcoming season by welcoming in Mike Griffith here today to DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's say hello to Mike Griffith here, kind enough to join us. Mike, I guess let me begin with this. I got a good bit of snow. Now, it's not deep. It's probably only what you might call like a light dusting or something like that. But It's covering the ground pretty completely all around my house here. You're a little closer to Athens than I am. How much snow did you get where you are?
Yeah, I thought your forecast and warning on our team call this morning was pretty accurate, Brandon. There's a lot of freezing over and a lot of people staying over the roads. So as I look out the window, there's still some snow on the ground. Obviously, very cold conditions. Everyone make sure you have that little drip going so your pipes don't freeze, and be very careful on the roadways. Heed what the authorities advise. We've had some accidents and some cars slipping around in this Athens area, Brandon.
About here over the course of the last couple of days is, I think, something that Georgia fans should take comfort in. And listen, we have not sugarcoated the fact that Georgia's got a lot of areas in which they need improvement. Offensive line was surprisingly not very good for Georgia this past season. Got to be way better. The offensive statistics took major regression in 2024 compared to where they've been in 2023. That's a real issue. It must be addressed. And we're not going to sugarcoat the need for Georgia to be better in a lot of areas. And yet, as someone who's been talking to Georgia fans for a long time, as someone who is a Georgia fan myself, the one thing that I take a lot of comfort in is that as Georgia attempts to address these issues, it's doing so from a position of strength. I think the way to early top 25s are really fun. I love the way in which media types are sort of rushing to get those out there. And we're seeing Georgia, kind of top 4, top 5, and essentially all of those for next season. So, yeah, there's no more Carson Beck, and there's a brand new starting quarterback who hasn't played a full season before, only started one game in his Georgia career. And there's a team trying to fix, kind of an NCAA worst number of drops and, fix some stuff on the offensive line and be more sound tackling on defense and all of that kind of stuff. All of that's true, but there's still only a small handful of teams that can even be projected to be better than Georgia next season. And when you look at some of who those teams are, I'm going to raise my eyebrow with a little bit of skepticism about some of that as it is. So talk to me about that here for a moment. On the one hand, Georgia really needs some improvement. On the other hand, there are still only a couple of teams that have any justifiable case to be better than Georgia in 2025.
Yeah, I guess I'd start with, going back and looking at some notes from Kirby, and when we examine more closely what happened to the Georgia offense this year, and he did cite the attrition. Obviously, the top 2 receivers had some off-the-field issues that led to suspensions. We had some injuries as well in the backfield. So right there, you had some attrition that took away 3 or 4 of your best players. Even ETN missed some key games. So let's start with the attrition. 2, Kirby pointed out the schedule was extremely difficult. And when you play these sort of teams, it does affect your statistics versus, Ohio State, which had a couple of Mid-American Conference teams and some other really poor team on their schedule, in addition to a Big Ten that I think finished with 4 teams in the top 25. Conversely, the SEC with 7, a much deeper and better conference from top to bottom, I think most would agree. So the attrition, the schedule, and then Kirby pointed out that the defense hadn't done as much to help the offenses in past years, whether that was producing turnovers or more 3 and outs to give the offense better field position and more possessions per game. So I think it was, those 3 things: the attrition, the schedule, the defense having some struggles early on. Remember, the defensive line was quite thin at the start of the year. You had a secondary that had to be coached up from the bottom. You'd lost 3 top 100 picks out of your secondary, some major rebuilding there. And then Smile Munden really didn't come to fruition until the Tennessee game, really didn't have the best of Smile until late in the year. That explains why this Georgia defense was so much more potent at the end of the year when some of those defensive linemen got healthy, the secondary got experienced, and Smile Munden was informed. That was a pretty salty defense. Now, as far as this next year, the trend I see among the teams that are ranked high early on is returning quarterback play. And I don't think we're going to get around this. I think we're going to continue to talk about this quarterback situation. Is it good news? Is it bad news? Is it adequate? Is it inadequate? What do we think of Gunnar Stockton? Will he join the ranks of some of these more elite quarterbacks? Could he have a Riley Leonard sort of year for Georgia? Or does he not have that sort of upside? Does Georgia go get another quarterback? Do they not? One thing about these way too early top 25s, Brandon, we will see more way too top 25s updated after the spring portal season. As things stand, I think you're concerned about the offensive line is probably the light that's flashing the brightest for me. Obviously, Ernest Green needs a return to health. At his best, I think he can be elite. Monroe Freeling was a high-prized recruit who got thrown into the fire a bit this year and didn't always do the best. That hurt Georgia has to solidify those offensive tackle positions. Is Drew Bobo the center of the future? Perhaps, but I doubt he'll be the number one center in the nation as far as the NFL is concerned, as Jared Wilson was. Be very hard to replicate the performances of Fairchild and Ratledge at guard, even though I'm very optimistic about Micah Morris.
All right, a couple of things that you just mentioned there, and
it's a lot.
You referenced the Kirby Smart evaluation of the offense from his post-game press conference at Sugar Bowl. Mike, I love Kirby. Any Georgia fan obviously would. Kirby Smart, best coach in college football. I think he's got a lot more success on his way as the Georgia coach. You can't have more reverence for Smart than I do. His evaluation of the offense in that post-game press conference at Sugar Bowl was a bunch of hogwash. I don't think Kirby Smart believed a word of what he was saying. There are a lot of things that Kirby says that are, as candid and real as could be. But when he just wants to make it up from whole cloth, he certainly reserves the right to do that. And in that particular moment, Kirby Smart was making it up as he went along. The idea that all of the offensive regression for Georgia can be explained away by, playing a tougher schedule. You got to play a tough schedule again in 2025. So if the offense only works against lesser competition, then it doesn't work. I mean, and I'm not someone who's calling for coaches to be fired and things like that. But at the same time, I do think there is a need to be honest here that the offense's struggles this season was not the defense's fault. The defense may not have been as good as it was in 2021 or even in 2022. The defense more than did its job, even in Ole Miss, where where obviously is probably the worst regular season game for Georgia all year long. Even at Ole Miss, they still forced 3 field goal attempts from Ole Miss that day. They still had a chance to kind of keep Ole Miss below 30 and give Georgia some opportunity to win that game if they could have done anything offensively. So listen, if this was like politics or something like that, the fact checkers would have been having a field day with Kirby Smart after that, that post-game press conference there in New Orleans. I love him. I think he's a great steward of this program. I think his leadership is top notch. That was not a candid assessment of the Georgia offense in that post-game press conference at the Sugar Bowl.
Maybe not completely candid. One thing I'd point out about the defense, and I think you're right. I think they did keep Georgia in a lot of games, but it was more, and I remember a couple questions to this effect. It was more of a bend but don't break defense. And the reason why is because the run defense, Brandon, as you know, what was it, 5 or 6 years in a row, Georgia was number 1 or 2 in the nation stopping the run. And then I believe they slipped to 19th in 2023. And I believe they were around 34th or 35th. And the reason I bring that up is because when teams can run the ball effectively and stay on the field, as Notre Dame did, one of the more surprising stats to me, Notre Dame only had 244 total yards. Their longest touchdown drive was 13 yards. Of course, the Georgia defense did not lose that game. However, Notre Dame did win the time of possession in that game. They were able to convert at key moments. And after that 4th down, fake punt, whatever you want to call that whole Marcus Freeman shell game with the 11 substitutions, Notre Dame was able to run out the clock. Now, I don't know if Georgia could have scored in miraculous fashion in the last 5 minutes as they did against Georgia Tech. Notre Dame defense was significantly better. But I do think the fact that Georgia's run defense fell off did have an overall effect. Now, to your point, that's not why the Georgia offense was inadequate, but it was a contributing factor to some of the statistics that we saw. I agree with you. I thought the skill positions were lacking. Clearly, they missed Ra Thomas and Colby Young. They led the nation in drop passes. There's no way to sugarcoat that or put any lipstick on the pig of a Dylan Bell wide open drop in a key moment, or a Arian Smith drop on the opening drive against Alabama, or a Arian Smith missed audible call that led to an Alabama interception inside the Georgia red zone in the Tide's second touchdown. Receiver play was abysmal, and I would put that at the very top of the list. I'd like to think that Georgia has addressed that with Branch and the A&M receiver coming in, Noah. I think these guys are very good, but I don't know if they're elite. As I watched the championship game Monday night, and I know you were there and you were circulating and soaking it all in, those Ohio State receivers were elite. And I think Georgia needs to get back to getting elite players that are game changers, difference makers, A.D. Mitchells, Ladd McConkey's, Brock Bowers. Do we see those guys on the team right now? Outside of Frazier, I don't know that I'm convinced yet. I think there's a prospect of very good play. I think London Humphreys has a chance to be very good. Lawson Lucky, Oscar Delp. But is this Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, Trevor Etienne? I'm not so sure yet, but that's what spring's for. Georgia has a history of developing players. There's another portal ahead and a lot of young talent coming in that can make an impact.
So I think that's interesting. I mean, I don't dispute this. Nobody does receivers like Ohio State, and that's been true for a good number of years. I mean, their brand, obviously Brian Hartline gets a lot of the credit for that. Their brand with receivers is just top notch. And, it's kind of funny. I don't know their receivers were obviously, early in the game, of course, when Howard's got the streak of consecutive completions, a lot of that's because the receivers are getting open. But it's funny, Ohio State almost never threw until the final Jeremiah Smith play that kind of sealed the game. Ohio State really wasn't exploiting what we thought was a major matchup advantage for them against Notre Dame. They were content just to kind of, I would say, play a little bit more conservatively and lean on the running game a little bit. Perhaps that's maybe all they felt like they needed to do, but certainly they exploited that at the very end. Kind of an interesting game within the game when it came to those two teams on Monday night. But the other thing that you bring up is quarterback, and this is, I think, the appropriate context for next season, which is, okay, anytime you transition from a guy who had played a lot of snaps like Carson Beck, even if it wasn't always what it, Georgia fans hoped it would be. But when you transition from a guy who's played a lot of snaps to a guy that's played very few, there are, of course, going to be some really big questions around that. But, when you look at who, whether it be the official polls later on in the summer or the kind of unofficial stuff here right now, when you look at the teams who are likely to be ranked ahead of Georgia, they themselves also have their own quarterback questions too. Both the teams that played on Monday are going to have different starting quarterbacks next season. I mean, I guess if the NCAA were to very quickly change the eligibility rules, maybe Riley Leonard comes back. But other than that, he's played 4 years. He's done. Will Howard's done for Ohio State. And by the way, the notion that Howard was some great quarterback, that's actually a relatively recent phenomenon. He did not have a great regular season, although I think he's been outstanding in the postseason. Texas has Arch Manning. I do believe that Arch Manning is good. I believe that we'll probably see that from him here this year. But this is still a guy that's going to be playing his most significant snaps in his junior year. Has not really played a lot the last couple of years. And, with Quinn Ewers clearly playing below a national championship level, Arch Manning never overtook him. Now, maybe that's because Steve Sarkisian didn't want that to happen, but with Ewers leaving a lot to be desired, Manning never took over for him, which at least forced you to ask some questions about what he's going to be in 2025. So unless one of these teams that we just mentioned goes out and spends gigantic money on a current starter for another team, there is not some savior transfer quarterback walking through the door for any of these teams. I just don't think that guy exists. I mean, the crop of transfer quarterbacks in the portal this winter was pretty meager. Given the fact that there's a very short window in the spring for anybody to come in and compete, the idea that an even better quarterback is going to emerge during the spring portal that didn't exist during the winter portal, I don't think that's true either. Frankly, most of these guys that are entrenched in their current schools are already getting paid very well for being there. So I don't know how much more of a bargain you can drive there on that. The point is that Georgia has big quarterback questions because it will have a new starter, but the other teams around it also have pretty significant quarterback questions too.
Oh, I'd agree with that, and by the way, Georgia beat Texas twice. I'm still trying to figure out how Texas finished ranked ahead of them when they had the same number of losses at the end of the year. And Texas comes to Georgia, by the way, next November. That Ole Miss team that we saw last year lost a lot of talent. You'll notice in the early rankings, they've dropped significantly into the 20s right now. So maybe Ole Miss, not the team we saw last year. You bring up Alabama, there's a team with a new quarterback. I doubt we'll ever see a first half performance by any Alabama quarterback like we saw from Jalen Milroe that night in Tuscaloosa. So I think your point is well taken. And as for the Georgia quarterback situation, I'm not sure where Ryan Puglisi's at. Perhaps he could provide some competition from within. All I'm saying is the level of play that I saw from Riley Leonard and Will Howard in the playoff exceeded what I'd seen from Gunnar Stockton. And to your point, Gunnar Stockton hadn't had a whole lot of experience to that point. We only saw him play one half a ball. He was very effective against Texas, allegedly the best defense in the SEC statistically. Of course, they only beat one team with a winning record in the SEC last year in league play. But I digress. Does Gunnar have the upside to lead a national championship team? He has mobility, some mobility, but is he going to break runs that we saw from other quarterbacks? I don't know that yet. Maybe in this offseason with an offense that's designed around his skills, I kind of go back to what happened with Georgia between 2021 and 2022 when Todd Monken had an entire offseason to design an offense around Stetson Bennett, and Stetson was considerably more effective and dynamic in 2022 than he was in 21 or 20. So I'm not giving up the ghost on Gunnar Stockton, but he's not considered among the elite NFL quarterbacks, prospects, because of the second level throws, the layered throws, very difficult, maybe with an off season with the first team, better receivers to throw to, patterns that match his arm talent, or maybe he progresses. We saw Stetson Bennett get much better throughout his career at Georgia. So again, not saying that Stockton isn't going to be the answer, but saying there is a question there when you look at what we've seen so far and you measure what we've seen so far against championship level quarterback play. The offensive line, I'll go back to that, Brandon. It's hard to get an offensive line transfer too. And I guess I would turn it and ask you, do you think Georgia has the makings of a championship offensive line with what they have coming back?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the honest answer is I don't know. Let me give you the most optimistic appraisal possible, and then we'll be more realistic after that. So in 2017, Georgia on paper to begin that year was thought to not have a very good offensive line. This is nobody, you got to remember, in summer of 2017, nobody knew Georgia was going to win the SEC and go to the Rose Bowl and beat Oklahoma and play for the national championship. Nobody knew that's going to happen. And so in the offseason of 2017, we were sitting here talking about a team that had been 8-5 a year ago, Kirby Smart trying to find his footing as a head coach. And when you were making a list of the major offseason concerns, offensive line was coming up all over the place because that group had not been great the previous year. And as funny as this sounds now, people didn't know what Andrew Thomas was going to be as a freshman starting at right tackle. To be completely frank, Thomas was a little bit of a mixed bag as a high school. People forget this. Thomas was a little bit of a mixed bag as a high school recruit. People just didn't quite 100% know what he was. Now, he went on to be the number 4 overall pick. But the point is, nobody knew that going into the 2017 season, he really emerged. Isaiah Wynn was kicking out to a tackle after having played mostly interior offense line. People, and this seems funny because he also became a very good draft pick, but people didn't quite know what he was. So sometimes the inverse of what happened this past season can happen for you. Georgia surprisingly was not as good on the offensive line in 2024 as people expected. In 2017, I would say, as someone who kind of lived through that, very pleasantly, Georgia was much better on the offensive line than it was before. So, Mike, this is my overly optimistic appraisal, is that sometimes things are just better than you think they're going to be without much in the way of explanation. So I would say that anybody who has a very, very big question mark around the Georgia offensive line has a lot of evidence to feel that way. But you know what? They've also gotten pleasant surprises at that position before. That is my overly optimistic appraisal of why maybe it might be better next season.
That is a very fair take. And just playing devil's advocate, we were talking Sam Pittman versus Stacey Searels. Now I will say Gunnar Stockton is much further along than Jake Fromm was, and Jake Fromm was adequate in 2017. Nate Frazier, I don't know that he matches Chubb and Michelle quite yet. I think they were factors. The receiving core was good, not great. Terry Godwin comes to mind. I believe one of the Ridley brothers, Riley Ridley, was one of the receivers. Mecole Hardman was beginning to emerge. Isaac Nauta was more than adequate at tight end, but I dare say I believe Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky every bit as good as Isaac Nauta. So I think your point is well taken, and Georgia was dominant that year. They just steamrolled team. I still remember doing videos with you when I was covering Tennessee that year and telling you they're going to checker Neyland Stadium, and I have no idea what they're thinking because Georgia's going to go in there and absolutely destroy Tennessee, and they did. So perhaps this offseason, that fire gets lit, and to your point, the inverse happens, as opposed to this year where there were some breakdowns and maybe the interior offensive line didn't provide the running lanes that maybe we thought they would. It's possible this offensive line could step up and be even better. Defensively, on the defensive line, Christian Miller is coming back. I think that's big. There's a little bit of a question at edge. Damon Wilson, losing him, that hurts. I think the back seven is going to be elite. I like Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen a lot. They'll be third-year starters. I feel great about that. K.J. Bolden is just fabulous. I love this kid. I thought he was outstanding this year, exceeded many expectations. He was very close to being the national freshman of the year. I can tell you that because I picked that award. Dalen Everett is back. He's a veteran. I expect him to be of shutdown nature. Daniel Harris will certainly improve. And these safety transfers, Kirby Smart knows how to evaluate. I think the back seven will be elite. I liked what I saw from Xavier McLeod at the end of the year. I thought he was playing very good. Big Baby's supposed to be back. Remember, he had that broken leg. Maybe the defensive line will take that big step in the right direction, and that dominant run defense will be back. And to your point, a lot of these teams that were so good in the SEC, they beat the heck out of each other. Alabama, Ole Miss, they're going to fall off at quarterback. That said, I'll be keeping an eye on DJ Lagway at Florida. You can count on this. The SEC will still be good and deep. It's going to be up to Georgia, to your point, to get better on the offensive line, have that interior development that we've seen year after year after year from Kirby Smart. That's why the Dogs will be a preseason top 5 for the 8th straight year, Brandon. And isn't it amazing that Vince Dooley never had one preseason top 5, and there'd only been 3 Georgia teams in the preseason top 5 before Kirby Smart took over as head coach. And now we're looking at 8 in a row.
Let me say one more thing about the offensive line, and I'll let you go because I've kept you long and I apologize. So obviously Monroe Freeling had the bad game against Notre Dame. Nobody disputes that, but I still have as much Monroe Freeling stock as ever. I think that Freeling is a good player. I think he's a good player who had a bad game. I am still big on Monroe Freeling. Ernest Green took some criticism here this year. I believe he was far more hurt than people realize. I am not giving up on Ernest Green. I think that Ernest Green's in line for a very good 2025. I'm still a big believer in his. I think Micah Morris coming back, it doesn't get a lot of attention because oftentimes when a player comes back, there's no announcement, right? You just sort of still here. But I think that Morris returning is a pretty big deal. A guy that I'm a big believer in is Daniel Calhoun. I think that Calhoun, one of the most important players for Georgia in terms of stepping up and being a part of that guard competition in 2025. I think that Calhoun's a big deal. And people kind of like what they saw from Drew Bobo at safety. At center here this in the 2024 season. The one thing I want to see, whether it's a Bo Hughley or Jamal Merriweather, somebody like that, I want to see those other tackle prospects make a name for themselves. And Hughley may be sort of the next in line to do that. I need to see another name emerge at tackle, because if they decide they want to play Green at guard, then what does that leave for Georgia at tackle? We need to see that other tackle name. But in the interior of this offensive line right now, with Morris coming back, Calhoun emerging, what Bobo has a chance to be, I think I probably like that group.
Yeah, I want to look at the running backs. I'll be interested to see how the freshman does coming in. He wasn't extremely celebrated coming out of high school. He looks solid to me. Looks like another Elijah Holyfield. Not sure about the breakaway speed, but a powerful runner with good vision. He could have an impact. I don't want to underestimate the return of Cash Jones. I thought Cash was very clutch and made many great plays, much, much better than he was ever given credit for. Brandon, I had a chance to meet with him one-on-one, maybe a little outside the media lines as he was leaving the room. And I said, did you ever have a 1,000-yard season in high school? He had a 2,800-yard season somewhere out there in Texas. Cash Jones is a very talented player that I think I underestimated, maybe just because of his size. But you think about him coming back, that's a really big deal. I wonder what's going to happen with the Robinsons. Rod Robinson and Branson Robinson. I had very high hopes for Rod Robinson before that toe. I thought he was going to be a major factor in a pile driver. He still could be. And Branson Robinson, when he gets that knee back, he could have that Zamir White type breakout year. So to your point, there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of reasons to believe in Georgia, the history and what Kirby Smart's done. But I'll tell you, this playoff's a game changer, man. Can you believe that Ohio State was the 4th place team in the Big Ten? They lost 2 of the 3 big games on their schedule. So much of this, it's like a NASCAR race. You got to finish the race, right? You could be the fastest car, but you got to keep your fenders clean. Stay healthy. Hard to do with this difficult SEC schedule and a very hungry and improving Georgia Tech at the end of every season. At least this year, more of a neutral site game than a road game when you go to Mercedes-Benz. I like that for Georgia, even though Tech's going to make that extra $10 million. It'll help them with NIL. But I think it helps Georgia, too, to play that game in the Benz instead of that old stadium in Atlanta.
Mike, good stuff. Appreciate your time. Thanks for making the snow day fun for us. We'll look forward to reading plenty more from you at DawgNation.com and chat with you back here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management very soon, too.
Don't you think Georgia should have been ahead of Texas, BA? I got to ask you that.
Off the top of the program. I mean, it's just absolutely ludicrous. And it's the kind of thing that gets me fired up. It seems like it's an attempt to erase the accomplishments from Georgia's season. So, yeah, I can promise you we were very fired up about that.
I appreciate it, BA. Have a good one.
Good stuff.
All right.
So good stuff there, Mike Griffith. Certainly love that conversation about what the next season will look like for Georgia. And, it's fun to discuss because there's a lot. There's a lot of variables, right? A lot of moving pieces. It gives us all a chance to sort of do what we like, Monday morning quarterback, and speculate. And it's just fun to be a college football fan this time of year because all of those options are kind of on the table for you. I think that's true. By the way, if you like more of what Mike gives you, make sure you sign up for our DawgNation.com newsletter. It's called our Hunker Download. You go to DawgNation.com/newsletter. You can get more information about that. Great way to stay up to date with everything on the Dogs. DawgNation.com/newsletter. Get the Hunker Download delivered right there to your inbox every single day.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So there you go. We'll get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here right now. Of course, getting ready for a great Dawg Nation cruise coming up in April. And if you like hearing from Mike Griffith, you can sit there and talk to him right there on the pool deck or at Perfect Day Coco K or one of those places like that. You can get everything you want to get from Mike Griffith because he's a big part of our Dawg Nation cruise each and every April. So if you've heard me talking about a Dawg Nation, or I should say a Royal Caribbean cruise, if that sounds fun to you, if it sounds like the kind of thing you'd like to be a part of, trust me when I tell you, there is no Royal Caribbean cruise like a Dawg Nation cruise because guys like Mike Griffith are there, Jeff Sintel's there, everybody having a good time, everybody enjoying all the bars, the lounges, the pool deck, the sunshine. Boy, it'd be great to be in some sunshine here right now. And Jessica Slater's a great travel agent. She can help you get ready for all of that. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. We're running a little bit late. I want to dive into a couple of stories here for a moment. So I saw some reports yesterday where it sounds like the SEC and the Big Ten are getting ready to have some more meetings with each other. This will be Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, no doubt kind of talking about their view of how the playoff should be moving forward. We're led to believe, based on some of the chatter that came out of Atlanta earlier this week, that there are no changes perhaps imminent for the 2025 season. After all, there was a 2-year contract in place for the 12-team playoff format. But in 2026, we are on guard for massive changes. And I guess the Big Ten, the SEC folks going to get together to sort of figure out what shape all of that should take. Now, I've told you before, I'm going to say it again. For me, all of this is very frustrating because I just sort of feel like Greg Sankey just sort of looks like he's getting played on all of this because let's go back to when Sankey kind of pushed the detonation button on the old college landscape as we knew it by bringing in Texas and Oklahoma. What was the immediate response to that? You had the Big Ten, the Big 12, the Pac-12, the ACC. They were all going to come together. They were going to form what they call the alliance. They were going to have an alliance and be against the SEC. That was the plan at the time of, the SEC's kind of not negotiating in good faith on this playoff. We're trying to push for a 12-team playoff. They didn't tell us they're trying to get Texas and Oklahoma. And so at that point in time, what was known as the Power Five, the other 4 conferences kind of banding together to be against the SEC. But the moment that the Big Ten realized they could also expand, all of a sudden now they're doing that. They're bringing in the 2 Pacific Northwest schools and the 2 LA schools. And all of a sudden now the alliance is no more. And now the Big Ten wants to be the SEC's friend. 5 seconds ago, it was fighting against the SEC, and now it sort of wants to fight with the SEC. And think about how the landscape has changed. And I just don't think we can lose sight of this. Prior to Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC, it was universally assumed that the SEC was head and shoulders over all of the rest of college football, a conference by itself. And from the moment all those dominoes started falling, all of a sudden now we're hearing about, it's the SEC and the Big Ten together. Suddenly it's the Big Two. And now the Big Ten has won back-to-back national championships. Teams from that conference won back-to-back national championships. And now you've got these yahoos on television, including Paul Feinbaum. And by the way, pay attention to that. Make sure you notice that. True colors coming out. You've got all these, yahoos on television saying now the Big Ten is the best conference and the SEC isn't what it once was. All of this happening under Greg Sankey's watch. And seemingly the only thing that he's capable of doing about all this is trying to figure out how to get more money, as if more of a payout for the schools on a per year basis is the problem. It's clearly not. So at a certain point in time, I'd like to see, I mean, look, if you want to go back years ago, the SEC was really struggling in basketball, not getting enough teams into the tournament. I think there was a year where they only had 3 teams in the NCAA tournament field or something like that. And Sankey kind of made it a mission for the league to be better at basketball. And boy, it really worked, didn't it? I mean, look around now. Look at all the teams in the top 25. Look at how many of the SEC teams will make it into the NCAA tournament. Look at Georgia, for instance, as an example of just how much better this conference has gotten from a basketball sense. Almost all of this coming because the league made it its mission to do so. Boy, it seems like that leadership right now is sort of absent from these kinds of conversations because they're too worried about how they can squeeze more blood out of a stone and get even more money for on a per team per year basis, as opposed to recognizing there is an entire apparatus in place to reduce the stranglehold the SEC's had over football. And so far, Sankey just doesn't seem as interested. I think he should sort of push back against some of that kind of stuff. So we'll see where this goes. Right now, Sankey content to work with the Big Ten, perhaps not realizing behind the scenes it's doing everything it can to work against the SEC. And right now, some of those actions seem to be working. On a happier note, I saw where Josh Pate, you may know who that is, put out on X yesterday some early week 1 point spreads, courtesy of FanDuel here. So if you want to already get excited about the upcoming season, FanDuel gives you a chance to do that. How about Alabama going to Florida State? Alabama right now, 7.5 point favorite. Life without Jalen Milroe. A little bit of a show me year for Kalen DeBoer. Obviously, a Florida State team that was among the worst in the entire country this year. So an interesting week 1 game there. Perhaps a little bit less prestige attached to that game you once would have thought. But nonetheless, an important game for both teams. How about Texas going to Ohio State? Now, can you believe that? The hype that's going to exist around that game. Ohio State's going to look a good bit different, although Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith will still be there. Texas is going to look a good bit different too, although we know the entire face of that program is going to be Arch Manning. You see Ohio State right now is a 4.5 point favorite there over that. What was that? You see 4.5 point favorite right now for Ohio State over Texas. LSU goes to Clemson. Clemson, a 2.5 point favorite there in week 1. This is an LSU team. Also, we talked about kind of the way in which Brian Kelly's kind of gotten beaten up a little bit lately. He leaves Notre Dame. They're better without him. He had Jaden Daniels, didn't really do much around him. Now Daniels looks like the best young quarterback in the NFL, perhaps. And now having to go to Clemson. Clemson loves beating these SEC teams. They can't beat Georgia, but boy, they love beating other SEC teams. And you better believe that Clemson will be fired up for LSU. That's a really big game. Notre Dame takes on Miami. Right now, Notre Dame listed as a 2.5 point favorite there. This kind of is in line with some of the way too early top 25s we're seeing from Miami, where even with spending what we're told is millions of dollars on Carson Beck, they're sort of barely a top 25 team and a home underdog to a Notre Dame team that's going to be completely remade after this year's national championship, with the exception, obviously, of its offensive line. I think that's interesting. Like how good is Miami expected to be with Carson Beck? And if you're not favored at home against Notre Dame, then what are we really doing here? You got Auburn as a 1.5 favorite at Baylor. Baylor was a very much improved team second half of last season. Tennessee is a 13.5 point favorite against a Syracuse team that was one of the most improved teams throughout the season. Fran Brown doing a great job there. And then South Carolina, an 8.5 point favorite. These are, by the way, games played in Atlanta. South Carolina, an 8.5 point favorite against Virginia Tech. Keep in mind, and people don't seem to want to remember this, the same way that Georgia's accomplishments seemingly erased by poll voters in the discussion about who the best conference is. People have conveniently seemed to forget that only one league had a winning record in the regular season against other Power 4 leagues. That was obviously the SEC, well above the 500 mark. So in the discussion of the SEC kind of being over or whatever it is that people are saying, people sort of forget that the SEC has had a good bit of success in the kinds of games that I just mentioned, and we will see if they're able to do that next year. Of course, conspicuous in its absence, Georgia, after having played in a lot of these games in previous years, will not really have the big September non-conference game here this year. So Georgia won't really be a part of that. Speaking of Georgia, a team that Georgia was in the mix for, at least based on some reports for a moment, as a possible quarterback transfer, Jacoby Criswell, leaving North Carolina, had some starting experience. There were reports connecting him to Georgia. We said at the time, I'm not quite so sure how real this is. We believe that Georgia would add some quarterback experience to its quarterback room to supplement the depth as much as anything. So I don't really quite know if Criswell's that guy necessarily. Well, now Criswell does have a home, reportedly so, going to East Tennessee State. So he'll become, is it the Pirates? The Buccaneers, East Tennessee State Bucks, I believe that is. He'll go be a Buck there at East Tennessee State, as opposed to, more of like a Power 4 type destination. So Criswell had some experience. I think was trying to line up a Georgia visit, but ultimately that's not going to quite work out. Criswell instead reportedly going to go to East Tennessee State. And we'll make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'll also mention real quickly here, Georgia tonight on the road, basketball at Arkansas. This is one of those games where I don't know that you would have said last week at Tennessee or home versus number 1 Auburn. I don't know that either one of those two games would have necessarily qualified as like must-win type thing. I'm not quite so sure that would have necessarily been the case, but I do believe this is the kind of game, Arkansas is, they started the year preseason top 25. They've been terrible, still winless in the SEC overall. John Calipari's first year not going the way that it was supposed to. Now their top freshman appears like he's hurt, will not play tonight. This is one of those games that's going to be a really important measuring stick for Georgia just to kind of get back to winning ways. You faced two teams this past week that honestly are probably better than you. I just think that Auburn's a better team than Georgia. Tennessee looks like they probably are too. But now can you play a team that you are seemingly obviously better than? And can you kind of get back to sort of winning games and perhaps even winning games with relative ease, shooting better from the free throw line, taking care of the turnovers, limiting the offensive rebounds, these sort of things that create the extra possessions. Can you go control the game at a bunch, stay aggressive to my spots? My targets were pretty conservative. I was trying to make aggressive swings to it. So crediting the mindset of Kirby Smart for the big win. Of course, Sepp Straka, a former UGA golfer, one of the dogs on tour, so to speak. So he wins the American Express, credits the mindset of Kirby Smart for how he got that done. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. We'll also give you a Gator Hater Updater, Lousy Stinking Gators, 1,537 days. That is how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Hope you all have a great day. Stay warm, stay safe, stay off the roads perhaps, and we'll see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Appreciate your patience as we do the show away from home today, trying to keep our people safe here. So we appreciate you being a part of that. Let's see if we can get some of these comments here. Looks like we having a little bit of an issue on Facebook right now. Let's see what that is. Let me try YouTube here for a second. Let's see what's going on if you're on the YouTube side of things just for a moment. We may have had a Facebook issue there. All right, on the YouTube side of things here, just from, we'll take a few comments. Let's see what else. Wyatt Fielden says he's worried because Arkansas needs a win tonight, so that's always going to be a worry. Yeah, I mean, I would expect Arkansas to play like a hungry team. Now, last week, the same type of thing. They go to LSU. LSU was winless at the time. Both teams kind of, in a kind of a hungry spot, and Arkansas could not find a way to get that done. Then they got blown out in the Battle Line rivalry game against Missouri on Saturday. So, I mean, this is an Arkansas team that is really, really struggling, but at the same time, it's the sort of game in which you just got to try to find a way to be better than this team that's desperate to get some sort of win against somebody. Calipari is facing a lot of heat right now. Arkansas is one of those programs that they want to be good in basketball. They want to be good in these other sports. They brought in Calipari in hopes they'd be able to do that. But right now, that is not working out. Let's see what else. Somebody asked about Eddie's return. Eddie hoping to be here on Friday. Eddie is hoping to be back on Friday. Eddie is hoping to be back on Friday. Let's see what else. So it sounds like we may have had a little bit of an issue there for a moment. Hopefully it's back okay now. Okay, yeah, so we had a little bit of an issue with the stream. Sounds like we got knocked off Facebook. Seems like we're still okay here on YouTube, though. Wyatt Fielden also asking about the Bills or Chiefs coming up on Sunday. I mean, Listen, I would love nothing more than for Buffalo to win that game. I really would. I think the Buffalo could win the game. I do. If there's any kind of close call from the officiating standpoint, certainly seems like that'll go the direction of the Chiefs. We've seen enough of that to kind of assume that's the case. Certainly seems like that'll probably be true. But boy, I'd love for Buffalo to win that game. I would love for Buffalo to win it. Let's see what else. We'll check out DawgNation.com here in a moment. Yeah, you can make a little snowman that are about that tall. Yeah, they look like Smurfs. But if you get the 6 inches, man, you can do some real snowmen. You can have some real sledding. Although the kids got out last night and they were flying down the hill with what little bit we did have. Oh, let's see what else. Sounds like we're having some streaming issues. We may just get off here in a minute. Let me pop over to DawgNation.com, say hello to them, and then after that, we may have to sort of bounce out of here for today. Let's see if I can get over here and say hello to some folks here just for a minute. Hopefully that's working. Okay. Yeah, let's say hello to DawgNation.com, then we'll get ready to get out of here for today and let y'all get on with your day. And if you're working, we'll let you get some work done. If you're enjoying being home today, we'll let you settle in and enjoy some of that. Ken Holcomb says Pensacola got 7.5 inches. I mean, can you believe that? I think I saw this, Ken. That's like the all-time record. I mean, obviously, you would assume that would be. Like, we are literally seeing record snowfall here. Garrison Tucker hoping for Zachariah Branch to be a big impact in the offense. I mean, I do think he's one of those guys you have a chance to really use in a creative way. And I think he's hungry for that because I don't know that USC was getting the best out of him, especially this past season. Now, who's to blame for that and what responsibility does Branch take for that himself? I don't really know. But I think there's a lot of, intrigue about how a guy like Branch could be using the Georgia offense. And, frankly, as a way of kind of silencing some of the criticism that does exist, for a guy like Mike Bobo being creative with someone like Branch would obviously be a big thing. And maybe we'll see some of that with Dylan Bell here too, who perhaps has a chance to, be used in a very creative way. Savannah Bryan checks in to say 4 to 5 inches in Savannah. He says the sun's out now and it's bright and beautiful. I mean, I just can't hardly even imagine it. These sort of quaint old southern cities like Savannah, New Orleans, just to see them with snow on the ground is just such a different thing. That's really neat. That's really neat. Yard Dog says the entire nation is turned against Kansas City. I really feel that way too. I do. And I don't know that the full scale revolt against the Chiefs is justified and fair, but it's happening and I'm right there with it too. I think that's the case. Let's see what else. UGA Marine asked about Colby Young. Yeah, nothing new on that front yet. I mean, as it stands right now, he is going to trial on this, I guess. Garrison Tucker also asking who the key playmaker on offense will be other than the quarterback. I mean, the first answer for me on that question is probably Nate Frazier, because I do think that Frazier is likely in line to get more carries than any Georgia running back has been probably since DeAndre Swift in 2019, in terms of the fact that he could be the true workhorse for Georgia at running back. And, he showed some flashes here this year. Georgia needs a major upgrade in that position, but I do believe there's a chance that he could provide it. I do believe he could provide it. All right, sounds like we're having a little bit of an issue. So let me just go for today. We appreciate you being here. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. They'll get you, if you're stuck at home and you want to make sure you stay cozy and warm, get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. They'll do that for you. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily. Hopefully back in the studio, maybe. DawgNation.